Hey guys, so in this video I'm going to go through my top feminist books up to the beginning of 2019. So by feminist books I mean books which were written to elevate the status of women and make a good argument as to why women should be allowed certain rights and privileges which were reserved for men. Or sometimes the author may not have intended, I believe anyway, for the book to be classed as feminist, but then it's gone on to be so influential and pushing that we just can't really undermine the role that it's had on women's empowerment. So to kickstart this, I'm going to go in with Supperless, and this is a graphic novel by Marjane. And Marjane was a descendant, well, she still is, a descendant of the Irani Shah who was deposed in the 70s. And she lived through the rise of, say, like an Islamic uprising in the form of the Khomeini. She then went on to be a refugee by herself as a teenager in Europe before arriving back at Iran and continuing. And it's just such an intelligent book, and it just really reminds you that women all around the world have different struggles, but that we still relate to so many of the same things. I would definitely recommend reading this book. And there's also a animated movie, which is just as good. The next book I have here is Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. Sorry, there's a bit of a glare, but this book is fantastic. It's a great work of sociology. Patricia Hill Collins is a great academic, and what it really does is just goes through how many images of black women have been created in the media. So it looks at the Jezebel, the mama, and how, say for example, black women have been pushed to be seen as over-sexualized in society, and many images have come out to sort of push that sort of narrative, but this sort of narrative had to be dominant in an era where, say, white slave owners were raping women. So it's a really great book, and it shows how history connects itself to media representation, and I just can't fault it, and I'm never going to be able to say enough in a couple minutes. Another book, and this is sort of a very popular book from the 50s, one that if you're a sociology student or a daughter of feminism, you may have come across before, but for me, it wasn't necessarily the best book I've ever read in my whole life, and I did actually think it was slightly racist. So it's outdated and not necessarily one that women from ethnic minorities would be able to relate to in every sense. I'm not even sure if every white lady would be able to relate to Bretty Friedman's experience. So that's The Feminine Mystique. And it just talks about the problem that has no name, an issue which was experienced by middle-class, predominantly white women in the 50s. And this was that they would usually get a good education, go to college, and then not get a job once they'd been married, basically. So they had the boredom of being a stay-at-home mom, and this would usually lead to mental health issues, or having to be self-prescribing themselves drugs, or necessarily just experiencing relation breakdowns in the home. It's a good book to read, it's influential, but up to you. I wouldn't judge you for not reading it. This book, however, is fantastic. Cinderella Ate My Daughter. It looks at what Peggy calls the princess culture, and which is being pushed by Disney, and how young ladies try to be dressing up in pink and try to push this ultra feminine image. And she looks at how Disney changing the story tell. So for example, many of the Disney stories are adaptations of the Grimm's or Aesop's fables, and but by them changing so many of these stories to make them basically perfect American dreams, they basically lost loads of the morals. And through that losing the morals, they have stopped teaching young women and young men a lot of messages that they're supposed to learn. And Peggy sort of looks at this in Cinderella Ate My Daughter, and she basically talks about why the girls have to have toys which are pink and why are such messages being pushed. Such an easy read. I really loved it, and it's one that I'd recommend to everybody. Now, a book I don't have here because I gave it to my auntie. Yep, great family. Is The Purity Myth: How Americans' Obsession with Virginity is Hurting Young Women by Jessica Valenti. And that it was also a really good book. It's sort of similar to The Beauty Myth by Naomi Wolf, I think it is. And both of those books sort of look at overarching ideas and ideologies in society which work to control women. So in Naomi Wolf's The Beauty Myth, it's how beauty is used as a way of either using it as an extra qualification for women, so giving them extra rights, or a reason to treat them lesser than or pay them lesser than or put them in back roles where they're not getting as much exposure so that they could experience, privileges and the right to be promoted. Whereas in The Purity Myth, it looks at how women who don't over sexualize themselves or engage with, say, the ultra sexualizing culture, say, I don't know, one night stands or promiscuity, which is fair enough. How the ones who do tend to put purity and virginity on a pedestal tend to be rewarded in society. So, both of them are great reads to see how these things work out in practice, and also to stop yourself from buying into ideologies which inherently just work to tear down certain women and disempower others. So another book I really love is 50 Shades of Feminism, because I haven't read 50 Shades of Grey. And it just has loads of different chapters. I think there's about 50 in here. Going through lots of different powerful women in Britain's experiences, whether it be from gaming to writing, so like Margaret Atwood's in here. There are charity directors in here, poets in here, gamers, obviously I just said that, bloggers, and women from a whole range of spheres. And it's just really great, I believe anyway, to just read about their experiences, and they just talk about some of their problems. Fantastic. 50 different perspectives, and so many are valuable. A really old French one, Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex. Yeah, this one took me a long time to read. In fact, I'm not sure if one of my university lecturers is watching this, but you set this as an essay one time. Boo, sir. You obviously wanted everybody to fail. This book needs a lot of time. I wouldn't try and eat it over a small amount of time. I wouldn't try and do it in some sort of a reading marathon. The Second Sex took me about a year of just in and out reading, but oh, it was so valuable. It was through this book that the term the independent woman was made ultra popular, and if you're a Destiny's Child fan, you obviously are very happy about that. The book itself just pushes that women need to have their own means to create for themselves and their own means to finance, and just a whole range of different things. It goes through the jealousies of the married woman, the jealousies of the pregnant woman, the jealousies of the teenage woman. Simone de Beauvoir has such a great understanding of women across a different range of time. And obviously I haven't even mentioned that it starts off with this sort of like history of women throughout time, and how different perspectives like materialism that Marx puts forward and psychoanalysts that Freud pushes actually work to be a woman's detriment. Do read. Another book will be Sylvia Pankhurst. Now, I didn't actually enjoy reading this book very much, but what I did enjoy was just seeing how much Sylvia Pankhurst fought for our rights. So if you're British, you'll be very familiar with the suffragettes and the suffragists. This is a great book to just push past all of that basic teaching that you got from school, which really probably hasn't grounded you very much. It didn't do me. But this book is great. It starts off with her and Winston Churchill, and reminds you how all of these influential people rub shoulders. And it's great to see how she ends her life in Ethiopia, and you get to follow Sylvia's whole journey. And I enjoyed understanding and gaining that knowledge, more so than reading it, but I would still recommend it. Another one is The Social Construction of Whiteness, White Women, Race Matters. So I read this at university and it is fantastic. So it basically just goes through the different experiences of being a white woman in America at this time, and she breaks them apart into different social classes, from working class to middle class to upper class, and within each class to how much they actually engage with different ethnic minorities, to sort of show you the different experiences and range of white experiences, white female experiences, in the same way there's a range of ethnic minority experiences. And it was great for me to read that as well, because obviously I'm not white and I can now sort of relate a bit better to other females and recognize that there is so much diversity as well. Fantastic book, and I really enjoyed it. So another book is Ain't I a Woman by Bell Hooks. I was initially really scared to read this book, but after reading it, it's really easy to read, much easier even than Patricia Hill Collins. And it just goes through, in a really lovely trajectory, the history of Black women in the United States and how their position has changed over time, from before civil rights to after civil rights, and how they were basically the victims of Black and white rape and a whole other range of misjustices. And I really like Bell Hooks, so I'm going to read more of her books in the future. Now, these are some notable mentions, and I should also point out I have a whole, like, 2 other shelves of feminism, like, books over here, and there are books that I haven't read. So, like, for example, I have Backlash, Changing Women, He's a Stud, She's a Slut, Intersectionality, some Sylvia Warby, The Female Eunuch. I just haven't read those books yet, so I can't necessarily talk on them. But these books over here are some notables. I haven't got my copy of The Handmaid's Tale, but that's always a great book to read. Another one is Woman at Point Zero, and it's an Egyptian feminist book, and it's really good. It looks at the perspective of a woman who basically kills a prince, and her story of how she starts from being abused from a young age, becoming a prostitute, and then basically being sold into slavery. And in the end, I'm not going to spoil it, but it's a good read, so try it. Another one I'd say is Half of a Yellow Song, Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'd even probably say Purple Hibiscus too, but this one especially because I feel like there's a range of different strengths in the women that it shows in the book, from just being able to persevere through war to also having to see yourself lose everything and still stand again. I really, really, really enjoyed that book. And another notable mention, which isn't a book that I enjoyed very much or that I even think is very necessary within feminist literature, like I have read some that I didn't, I don't think it's that great, but this would be this one, Men Explain Things to Me and Other Essays. Just not for me, really. I thought it was a bit simplistic, and to be fair, when I looked at my friends' reviews on Goodreads, they also thought the same. So those are my recommendations, and let me know if you recommend any other reads. I would definitely keep on reading feminist texts, so let's see what 2019 brings. See ya!